Hi, everyone. Can you see my screen and also hear me okay?
Yeah, I can see.
All right, okay, that's great. I think the app probably is a bit cranky today, so I'll update it after the session. But let's make a start. I think it's just already a bit late, so let me just start off with the summary of the learning outcome. So, what you get to see on your screen right now is primarily the unit spec. Do you see the unit spec?
Yeah.
Okay, that's great. So today, what we are looking at doing is obviously looking at covering learning outcome three. Now, this primarily focuses on, understanding cross-cultural trends, specifically in the context of tourism. Now, when we do look at cross-cultural trend, what we are trying to discuss in particular is looking at how do we manage, diversity when it comes to, tourism and hospitality industry, because of the fact that in this industry we have a lot of people who can work from different backgrounds, cultures, and obviously come from different geographies. So one of the clear things which most organizations, because it is manpower centric, would be needing to manage at some stage would be cultural sensitivities. And in such cases, when we do talk about diverse background and people working and coming from with different values, beliefs, and background, what becomes important is leadership. And in this case, the leadership is tasked with the aspect of managing, the various set of functions which would run the whole setup in as a team, as one team. So in this case, what we're going to do is primarily look at reviewing three, theories in general, which are going to be something which we'll discuss throughout the assessment criteria. One of them is going to be Hofstede, cultural dimensional model or theory, which was proposed by Kurt Hofstede, and we'll go into details a bit later. Then there's another theory that we'll also be looking at, which is Trompinar's seven dimensions of culture. And he came up with an idea and obviously proposed these seven dimensions in terms of how each of these dimensions that we look at, affects. Basically, what he did was bifurcated the different nuances of cultural values, beliefs, backgrounds into seven different dimensions. And these dimensions, if people or leadership or management within the organization is able to understand, then they're able to better orient manpower in terms of working in different functions and roles and responsibilities. The last one was Hall's context theory, and in this case, Hall essentially came up with two sides to the theory, that there is a high context and there's a low context. And in this context, he put across certain examples which basically explain what are the key characteristics and attributes people need to look into to understand, and then categorize them according to these two basic concepts. And that theory again helps in understanding how do we enhance customer experience, or how do we look at enhancing employee engagement within the organization. How do we look at better marketing and performance management within an organization when you're dealing with different teams and people, and how does the management use this theory to better adapt certain policies, practices within the organization to make it more effective and efficient. So most of the discussion in learning outcome 3 is going to be focused around these three theories and theoretical models. What we are also going to be looking at doing is understanding their application in the context of international tourism. And then we will also look at discussing the three assessment criteria, which is one talks about critically reviewing these theories. That means we need to look at the ins and out, or pros and cons, or advantages and disadvantages of these three theories, which help us understand how and what is cross-cultural management in general. The second part would be to look at understanding how cultural diversity and the concept of cultural diversity has essentially come across in the field of tourism, and how does this matter when we look at managing a workforce which comes from diverse backgrounds and works and takes up different roles and responsibilities within the organization. The third one is going to be focused on understanding how do we evaluate. Again, this is an evaluation part, so it will have pros and cons, and at some stage we'll have to give arguments and then conclude towards the end. But it will talk. It will be focused on discussing what you call how do you implement these models to help better manage human resources within the organization. So if you understand, there are chefs, for example, there are people who work within the administration part or the front office or the different departments within the organization, and if they come across from different cultures, how does the management look at effectively managing the workforce to be able to understand the goals, the objectives, and then towards the end, work towards them. And the whole objective of an organization within this sector is primarily to look at focusing on, providing a great customer experience so that they can get repeat business, they can build loyalty, and obviously they can get the customers to come in or consumers to come in and use the functions or the services again. So these three would be the bits that we will look at, and they will all be centered around understanding the details about the three cultural theories. So let's look at going into a bit more detail by getting into the presentation. The presentation is focused on primarily the coverage of these three theories and the three assessment criteria that we need to look at some stage from a point of view of going into details like one, first understand the theories, second, look at how their application can be done in the context of international tourism, and the third would be to evaluate how these theories help in better management of human resources within the organization. So three main aspects of it: cultural approaches, where we understand theories. So here, if I write Hofstede, cultural theory, we then look at Trompiners. So the spelling of it, one second, Trompiners, 7 dimension. So we look at Trompiners, 7 dimensions, Pinars, 7 dimensions of culture. How did he segregate this? And the last one is Hall context theory. And then obviously what we want to look at is implications of these theories in the context of international tourism. And then last but not the least, what we want to be able to do is how do we effectively manage, and I would put it this way, effectively manage and work with the diverse, I would say, labor force in the organization. So these are the three aspects that we want to understand today, and let's go into one or two classical details of understanding the main context and headline of the the learning outcome. So it talks about cross-cultural management trends. What are these cross-cultural management trends? That is the first thing that we want to understand. So when we do talk about cross-cultural management trends, in the context of hospitality and tourism, what we are looking at is that this is going to be looking at dealing and leading and employing and supporting people working across from different backgrounds within a particular organization. So as an example, if I take, say, we discuss Marriott and Hilton hotels, these are two examples that are taken across the unit to discuss certain aspects. So when we look at, say, for example, Marriott hotels, or you look at Hilton, they have a number of properties across various, I would say, countries. Now, when they have properties across various countries and geographies, there is also the difference in terms of manpower which they have, which they are employing within these geographies to manage these properties and obviously service customers. Now, when we look at doing that in this context, what the management has to do is they have to sometimes employ local manpower. That means there would be some people who would be coming in from the head office, but they will be termed as expats. But generally, what you're going to see is that people within a particular geography or managing a particular property or a set of properties would essentially be local to that particular geographic area. They will have a good understanding of the local culture, people. They will come from that background, and also have very good and key understanding of the market and market trends and their competition. So when we look at relating this in the context of looking at managing people from diverse backgrounds, this is where the cross-cultural management trends would essentially be becoming important for people in the leadership position to understand these and then use them for the benefit and for the better management of the workforce within the organization. Now, examples of these would say, for example, look at training and development. Now, sometimes you have employees who come across from a different geography. If they come from a previous background or working experience of working within a hotel chain, they would have some context of how they would need to adapt their role and responsibilities within a new, let's say, company. Now, when we look at new, it could be because they've had a change of job, they've had a rise in, for example, a promotion or a rise in their salary, and that is one of the reasons that they move from one competitor to the other. Now, in such cases, these employees would have very good idea in terms of how training and development can benefit them to understand how the workings of the organization can be synchronized or mapped, I would say, within their role and responsibilities. So in such cases, when you look at if I was an L&D manager or learning and development manager within an organization like Marriott, and if I had to train employees within the organization for a new property or a hotel which is being launched and it's going to be functional school, one of the main things that the L&D managers would be looking at is they will need to understand the background and culture and also the values and beliefs the employees come from. So if I have say for example the food and beverage department, F&B department, and if I'm looking at doing a training for the people who will work within the department and they come across some different backgrounds, because the hotel would say for example boost of Mediterranean, continental, Chinese, and different kind of cuisines. They would be people who would come from different backgrounds and different areas. But if you're looking at conducting a training on the machinery and equipment within the restaurant, or the facilities within the hotel, you would need to adapt to understanding their language they speak, the culture they come from, how they can work and work in teams, and essentially having to understand those dynamics would help you better manage the workforce from a point of view of working within the organization. And what you'll also get to see is that within this industry, you have people coming in from different backgrounds, and sometimes you have to look at people coming in from diverse teams as well. That means there would be people who come across with different experiences, and they would then also offer, and when they are put together, they also offer different sets of solutions to a problem, and how these problems can be approached or issues can be approached can vary from one person to the other or from one property to the other. And in such cases, sometimes from a management perspective, to manage people working within diverse team also turns out to be a challenge. And if you have a good understanding of the people that you work with in terms of their values, beliefs, background, culture they come from, it helps you to build a relationship and obviously better manage them from a point of view of looking at, I would say in some cases, the outcome. And again, communication part of it also portrays this aspect of cross-cultural communication sometimes need to happen, because if language tends to be a barrier, then all of them would need to have one particular language that they would need to understand. And sometimes what we look at is when we deal with people in the front desk, or when we have people working within the events management department of the organization, or in this case a hotel, you generally see that they tend to have people or manpower which essentially is able to speak multiple languages, which allows them to strike a chord, or obviously let's say pick up inquiries from consumers, and this makes the whole aspect of communicating across with customers much more easier, because you might expect to have calls coming in from various parts of the country, city, or even different geography. And in such cases, when you're looking at offering these services to consumers, what you would need to do is have people who are able to understand the language, communicate in their language, and obviously understand the reasons why they are looking at booking, or in some cases specific requirements which need to be fulfilled for the purposes of functions, or I would say important functions. They would need to be able to understand them and obviously plan them internally within their team. So cross-cultural management, becomes a key aspect of looking at managing workforce within the organization. And this is quite important because it helps the management or the people within the leadership responsibilities to be able to better manage their workforce, and obviously get them to work towards the goals and objectives which have been set, say for the year, for a particular time, or short term or long term. Now, there is a video that I've shortlisted, which is from YouTube. There is a video which primarily highlights how cross-cultural communication, one of the reasons that I picked out in cross-cultural management, is quite important. And when you look at properties, hotels, events, destinations, airlines, different operators working within this sector, one of the key things that they look at when they start operations or start a business in a new location, they would definitely employ local individuals which would be able to speak the language. They have a good understanding of the market, the culture, the people, and their requirements in terms of how they would be perceiving tourism and tourism related activity within that area. And that is a video that you can watch, which primarily helps you understand the aspect of what is cross cultural management, what are the five or six things which are very important when we talk about cross-cultural management. And one of the aspects that the video highlights is communication in the hospitality industry, and why people who are able to speak two languages or are bilingual or are able to, obviously speak multiple languages, are generally given a preference when organizations look at employing manpower in certain areas, because this allows them to break the ice, or obviously handle more consumer inquiries, or essentially understand the consumer where they're coming from, because they speak the same language, they come from the same background, they have the same culture, and the person working in that position is able to relate to when they're having these conversations with consumers. Now, what I've done is, in one or two subsequent slides, I've explained the four or five important aspects of cultural management. One of them tends to be cultural diversity. So when we look at hotels today, when you look at cruise ships in particular, they are mobile properties essentially, wherein people can have leisure tourism, or different types of tourism activity. And in such cases, you would generally see, say for example, the Princess, the Pearl, which are large, cruise ships which can ferry 2,000 to 4,000 passengers. They have a staff of up to 2,000 people. They remain in the sea, or obviously offer. Let me put it this way: they offer excursions which could be 7 to 14 days long and can visit multiple locations. You would generally find that they employ people which they employ a global workforce. Let's put it this way, and that global workforce has different backgrounds, different cultures, different values, different beliefs. And the management on the cruise ship, for example, would need to have a wealth of, obviously experience to be able to better manage the staff in terms of their expectations, and obviously the staff then better managing the customer or consumer expectations when they're offering these services in the context of, tourism and hospitality management. So working across with diverse workforce tends to be one of the key things that you would generally see in this particular sector, specifically so when we talk about international tourism. Now, there is also an emphasis on cultural intelligence. When I say CI, cultural intelligence, why we mention that is that this particular part of it, allows individuals to essentially have the capability to effectively understand the diverse cultural settings which the consumers are demanding. Now, if I look at tourism within the Middle East or in Islamic countries, there are certain nuances to which consumers are expected to understand. These are the things which are allowed, these are things which are tolerable, but these are things which are not tolerable. So in such circumstances, one of the key things which which comes in terms of the information giving from the tour operators and the operators within in general in this sector to people traveling for the purposes of tourism in these locations. Their main aim is to educate them and also provide them enough information so that they understand these diverse settings and requirements from a point of view of the geography. And when they are not, in some cases, you do get to see that there are issues or problems tourists can get into if they do not understand the cultural nuances of that particular location or that country. And in such cases, it can lead to, for example, jail sentences or being expelled or being turned away from immigration and not being allowed to come into the country. So in such cases, what you would look at is the organizations are going to invest in training their staff, and their staff in general will then be looking at providing this information proactively to consumers when they are looking at booking holidays and packages. So emphasis on having the local knowledge or knowledge about the local market and the cultural requirements becomes important when they employ workforce within the organization. Now, in some cases, you would also see that if I go to, say, for example, Morocco in Marrakesh or Marrakesh in Morocco, you go across to Dubai in United Arab Emirates, you go across to Jeddah in Saudi Arabia, you go to Singapore, for example, there are certain adaptations which a lot of these large organizations have done in order to attract consumers or customers within that geography. Now, this is because they need to understand what is the local culture, what is their requirement, what are their values and beliefs, and what kind of tourism activity would the local people be interested in. And in order to make their offerings and service offerings more meaningful, they need to have these understanding within the staff and then better orient their services in order to ensure that they are able to attract customers, with regards to, say, tourism and tourism related activities. One of the things that you would generally see in a lot of these five-star Michelin restaurants in the Middle East or in Muslim dominated countries, you would generally see a good example, which can be an easy example, which comes to mind, is that the availability of halal food. So if this is something which the staff is aware of, if this is something which the restaurants are aware of, which are serving this food, or providing these culinary delicacies to consumers, then it allows them to attract more consumers, and they can then come across in book or, say, for example, visit these destinations in an open, wholehearted way, because they understand that the services would be taking into account the requirements from a point of view of the local culture. Now, if we look at applying this to, I would say, a set of properties within a particular geography, then you would generally be looking at cross-cultural team collaboration. So if you have, say, Marriott having 4 properties within, say, I would say, I'm just picking out a number, plucking out a number from the air, but I'm looking at if Marriott has maybe, say, 10 properties in UAE, all these properties would generally have some sort of collaboration amongst them in terms of understanding the cultural requirements, the local requirements of the people, making sure that they are essentially focused on providing these services, which is going to be looking at meeting the expectation of consumers. So sometimes you would see that people would be transferred from one property to the other. They might get promoted and they might go across to a more performing or a bigger property in terms of promotion. And in such cases, they carry across what is called valuable experience that they would have from that location into a different property where they would be serving maybe the same set of customers, but maybe in more numbers and managing more people and more staff. So in such cases, you would generally see cross-cultural team collaboration happening on various kind of activities, and these would essentially be expansion of, I would say, individuals understanding the cultural requirements. Now, one such example that I would give you is that if in the region there are 10 properties of Marriott, one of the main properties which also has the head office and does, say, centralized marketing from an aspect of reaching out to consumers and selling these properties and benefits in terms of maintaining occupancy rates across the year, they would work with different sets of operators, operating in the market. So they could have tie-ups with airlines, they could have tie-up with tour operators, they could have tie-up with event agencies, they could be also looking at having tie-up with different agencies in the market. And what they are going to be looking at is making sure that the information that they have, which kind of uh, conforms to the consumer expectation, they would proactively provide that information so that it goes across in the communication which the organization is doing. And that is happening not just for one property, but because that head office or that property manages the function across the geography for the other properties as well. That is where you would generally see cross-cultural team collaboration happening. So there might be a general manager marketing who would be based in one of the properties, say in Dubai, but he would be liaising and working with, say, marketing managers or assistant marketing managers with other properties would have in, say, Ras Al Khaimah or Abu Dhabi, or in other places within the Emirates, and they would require what is called cross cultural team collaboration. One such aspect could be seen as an example would be that you land up in Dubai, you want to go across to Burj Al Khalifa, and then you also want to experience a desert safari. You also want to go across and do some sea related activities. So here, one property might not be able to offer, say, for example, all such facilities. And in such cases, when they do liaison and work closely together with other properties in that area, which are a part of the group, then some of these activities which they would need to liaison with other properties that can provide. In such cases, you would see cross-cultural or team collaboration happening amongst the various properties in that region, and that would be important as well. From a management perspective, I would need to have the right connections. I would have a bit of networking with my colleagues or with a set of peers that I work with, and obviously that would allow the things to flow smoothly in terms of operations to happen smoothly. So sharing of, say, for example, sometimes, I don't know in terms of whether you've seen, but sometimes when you go across and visit certain properties or certain locations, what you are going to see is that if there are 3-4 hotels in that same area and they belong to the same group, what will generally happen is that they will have activities that will be offered to consumers staying in a particular property. So there might be a water park in another property, which people staying in one location will have preferential access to, or to a certain extent get, I would say, attractive offers to be able to participate. There might be, say, for example, some sports related activity in another complex, which is maybe a beach related property, and there could be something which is related to activities related to, say, nightclubs and other aspects of entertainment, which would be in third property. And guests staying in a particular property or hotel will have access to this because they booked the holiday with a particular a company like Marriott, and because they have properties which are within the near vicinity, in order to promote and get more revenue from the consumers staying at one property would be offered. So one of them has a water park, one of them has an entertainment facility, one of them has facilities related to, say, for example, sea sports or adventure sports. They would be able to move around these properties and enjoy these activities, which would mean that the three different teams in these properties would need to have some sort of collaboration to be able to offer these packages or activities to consumers staying in one particular property at some point in time, and not have conflicts or not have double bookings and things like that. So this is where you would, if I know my colleague in the other place and I need to make some arrangements, they would be done through the route of what is called team collaboration. Now, any questions so far?
No, not.
Okay. Now, when we do talk about, essentially understanding the cultural dimensions and why culture is quite important, what we need to be able to do is understand three specific models. Now, one of the first models that we want to understand is basically Kurt Hofstede's, framework that he came up with, and he proposed 6 dimensions, of the six cultural dimensions essentially. So let me just bring a picture across because this has got squeezed in. 1 second. So there, when we look at his particular model, what he proposed was, what he proposed in terms of his particular model was, dimensions which are related to, cultural aspect, but he proposed them from a point of view of explaining it that when you talk about culture and various differences across countries, what kind of an impact that it would have, on the interactions which consumers do with people within this particular industry. So he was essentially a Dutch, national, and when he did carry out this particular exercise of understanding people working, and he worked within IBM to a certain extent. So when he looked at understanding how the company employs people within different geographies, or say, for example, 50 different countries or 55 different countries, what are the various dimensions which essentially can affect the working and productivity of an individual within the organization. So he came up with these 6 dimensions, as we call them today, and these dimensions primarily were, things related to power index, how comfortable people are essentially with unequal sharing of power. So there is, when I look at sharing of power, or when we look at the delegation of power at a particular, in a particular at a particular level within the organization, how comfortable are people, with regards to the sharing of power. And in some cases, when we look at 2 types of index, starting with 0 to 100, if the power sharing is unequal, then there would be people who would be unhappy because they, for every decision that needs to be taken at whatever level, they would need to go back to management. This will make the decision making process lengthier and longer. So one of the things that he came up with, in order for in order for him to be able to measure the expectation of people working within the organization, was something as a dimension that is classified as what is called the power distance, or power distance index. The second bit that he came up with was INV, which is talking about individualism versus collectivism. Now, when we look at people working within the organization, do we have people, whether they value personal independence or whether they look at group, kind of mentality or loyalty? And that was the second dimension, because sometimes when you get to meet and interact with people within the organization, you would generally see that people either will go individually or they will go collectively and support certain objectives that within the organization. The third bit that he looked at was masculinity versus femininity. That means whether the society values competition, success, and the quality of life, and whether they look at favoring males or they look at favoring females. The fourth index that he came up with was what is called the uncertainty avoidance index. So here, how people working in the organization from different cultures, how do they tolerate uncertainty or ambiguity? So sometimes you would see people working within an organization would essentially be focused on doing tasks. If they find the tasks and understand what are the requirements of that particular task, that means the instructions to carry out some of the tasks are quite clear. And in some cases, people do not like ambiguity because they feel confused, they feel lost because of the fact that there's a lack of proper instructions or leadership within the organization to be able to carry out certain objectives or fulfill certain objectives. So in this case, the uncertainty avoidance index, UAI, was another dimension that he proposed. Now, LTO is basically long-term, short-term, orientations. So here, when management looks at making decisions, whether they focus on societal benefits from a short-term perspective or from a long-term perspective, does the management, implement, say, for example, a change, or implement something in the organization, and do they want a short-term result, or they want a long-term result. So how tolerant they are, or how tolerant or focused they are to be able to understand whether this particular change would bring short-term would be focused on achieving results in short term, or would be focused on achieving results in the long term. So here the management employs reward management as a technique. That means if you get results, if you fulfill objectives, if you meet the goals, you will get rewards, and they could be in the form of incentives, rewards that the management would be putting in as a part of your job description. The last index, the dimension that he talked about, was essentially indulgence versus restraint. So here he talks about and proposes that whether the organization or the society will allow people to, satisfy their desires, or will not have any tolerance to, satisfying some of their goals and objectives, which the employees of the organization may have an expectation towards. Now, with these dimensions that he proposed, his main idea was to primarily look at differentiating between people working within the organization, where they come from, what is the culture they support, and how does it impact, the general working of the individual within the organization on a day-to-day basis. So when I look at day-to-day basis, what I'm talking about is, what is the attitude, behavior, they are expected to show, they are essentially showcasing or highlighting, and how would the management and leadership look at facilitating communication which would be effective to get the work done at the end of the day. So in some cases, when we look at the aspect of using Hofstede's cultural dimensional theory, what we are focused on is understanding these 6 dimensions where employees can come from. And in such cases, when you know the cultural dimensions or the values which people carry, then as a result of that, you would be able to better categorize and put together manpower in groups, which will allow jobs, or I would say tasks, to be accomplished. So this particular theory is proposed by Gert, and he focuses on 6 different aspects of the cultural aspects of in 6 different dimensions, wherein he talks about these aspects which can be rated from 0 to 100, and when they look at how central you are, from the aspect of that dimension, they would give you, from a point of view of management, give you very clear perspectives in terms of what the management needs to do. So if there are people who are focused on, say, for example, getting power, then delegation of power needs to be done at individual level, whether it's at the front end management, middle management, or senior management. There should be some delegation power in terms of making decisions that should be available, which would allow the organization to function and effectively, function to meet its goals and objectives. Now, the second model was Trompiner's model, wherein he expanded on the Hofstede's framework, and he added the 7th dimension. Now, he named these dimensions slightly differently. Now, these dimensions, essentially, from a point of view of his naming, were essentially, the 2 sides from 0 to 100. So he named them as universalism versus particularism. He named them as individualism versus collectivism. He also had dimensions like neutral versus effective, specific versus diffuse, achievement versus ascription, and sequential versus synchronous. So when we do talk about these dimensions, he expanded and added one additional dimension, which is internal versus external control, or that was one of the aspects wherein he essentially tried to look at understanding whether the organizations hold and give importance to cultural values, behavior of the individual within the organization, and how does that affect decision making process, and how important is it in the process of supporting decision making. So in his example, when we do talk about Trompiner's 7th dimension, If I just bring across another picture which explains this slightly better. So he focused on understanding the workforce, which is people's, um, requirements, and he named them. He renamed some of the dimensions to focus on whether people will be more focused on universalism or particularism. That means people are more predetermined in terms of are following certain rules and regulation, or are they more focused on following something which others are following within the organization. So his model focused on, when we look at Fawn and Trumpiner, there were two particular people who basically published their work, and their model helps us specifically within the tourism and hospitality sector to understand how cultures might approach a problem and how they would resolve some of the misunderstandings which tend to happen within the staff, at when we have people working in from diverse cultures and backgrounds. Now, if we look at another image that I want to bring across, which gives a bit more definition to what this is. I think that's a better image. So here again, adding on to the dimensions of what Hofstede had done, he created the seventh, or proposed the seventh dimension, which was either you are internally motivated or you are externally controlled, and that was to again look at providing something wherein sometimes people are motivated by internal factors working within the organization, or people are motivated by external factors which are outside the control of the organization. And in such cases, you would generally see competitors, trying to poach employees or get hold of employees within the from a particular organization. And the reason why they do it is do it on the basis of more salary or better job prospects or higher roles and responsibility. And in such cases, the management needs to retain manpower. Then they would need to focus on understanding what are the internal and what are the external controls, you know, in terms of managing the workforce. Now, the third theory talks about, the context of, I would put it this way, it was proposed by Hall, and this theory divides the cultural dimensions into two parts, which is high context and low context. Now, the differentiation is based on the fact that how information is communicated and what is the meaning of that information which is being communicated, being interpreted on the other end. So when we do talk about Hall's context theory, what we are focused on is understanding the relation between communication and interpretation of message or information which is being interpreted at the other end, in context to cultural background and the cultural dimension. So here, when we look at giving an example, I would put it this way. Say, for example, um, if we were to look at, say, if, say, for example, we look at, I think what I've looked at is, if we look at sometimes when properties are across different geographies. So if you look at booking a hotel in the UK and vice versa, you look at booking a hotel in Australia, or you look at booking a hotel in Japan, you would find that there'll be certain subtle differences between the properties in these three locations. Just as an example, now if we are looking at, say for example, booking a hotel, you would generally see that within these regions there will be certain differentiations across these properties. Now, depending on, if I put it this way, so assuming if climate was one of the reasons which differentiated how these properties would offer services within three different locations or countries, you would say, for example, have a tropical climate in one of the countries. If you were looking at a country like Greece, for example, or looking at booking a property in one of the countries in, say, North Africa, you look at countries like India, for example, or you look at countries like Australia, wherein you have two extremes of weather available depending on which part of the year you're visiting that country. So if you're visiting in the first half of the year, you generally have, what is called summers there. But if you're visiting towards the second half of the year, you generally have winters, because it is in the southern hemisphere. So when we look at how the properties would have facilities within those locations, you would generally see that some part of the communication which differentiate, or some part of the differentiation which happens within these properties is because of the geography and the cultural side of things in terms of how things are perceived in that country. So when we look at this as a context, his aim, when I say his aim, I mean Hall's aim was to compare the influence of, personal cultural context in relation to the geographical cultural nuances, and then be able to better orient and provide these services to consumers in that area. Now, when we do look at detailing of it, what I would suggest is that when we talk about the two dimensions that he proposed, high context, which defines that the location or the culture in which you generally would have consumers' expectation being managed. They would be either looking at, say, for example, building a very closer relationship, or in some cases look at building, I would say, an interpersonal relationship with the consumers, in order for them to be able to attract repeat business or build the process of loyalty with a particular location, in terms of customer coming back and rebooking that location. So Hall's study was based on the fact that he wanted to identify the reasons where people attach, I would say, how do I put this across? They attach what is called, high context to it. That means they place higher preference for certain requirements as against certain things that they may also compromise, and would provide lower preference or context to those performance when they are looking at booking a location, say for holiday. So an example that I would like to give here is, theoretically, would be that when you look at booking a property, or when you look at booking a vacation, or a couple of things that you look at are non-negotiable. That means, no, I think we should go to this location, but within the location, when you look at booking a property or a stay with a hotel, you would then say, okay, there are certain things which are non-negotiable. That means we need to have a balcony, or a seaside view. You might also say that we need to have Wi-Fi within the property or within the room. You need to have, say, for example, video and entertainment services, which you cannot do away with. You might also put a feature like, okay, if it's a seaside property, having a pool, or a normal pool versus a salt pool would be one of the key requirements. Now, these are parameters that you would not negotiate with when you try and book a hotel, and they would be termed as high context requirements in the case of your preferences. And then there will be low context requirements or preferences that you would have, but they might not be that important. So you might say that as long as we have a 24-hour coffee shop and not restaurants serving food throughout the day, might be okay. You might want to look at certain things which you would put into lower preferences, and they would be termed primarily from a point of view of having a context that you would consider. You might still go ahead and book, but you might consider, if it is there, it is a plus point. If it is not there, it is not a deal breaker. And that is what he meant when he looked at differentiating consumers requirement from a point of view of high context and low context. And he puts it puts this in relation to the cultural requirements or locations requirement when you look at booking a holiday. So if I decide that I want to go to Japan, or I want to go to Tokyo, you're looking at booking a city break essentially. So here, the advantage or the reason why you're booking this holiday is you're looking at going to a city break. You're looking at going and meeting people, or experiencing cultural requirements from a modern amenities point of view, and that is why this particular preference is taken. But if you go across to and look at booking holidays towards Scandinavia, or for example, locations which are going to be, say, down under, when you're going looking at Australia in particular, then your reason of booking that holiday might be different, because you're not looking at taking a city break or a side holiday, but you're looking at essentially experiencing adventure and environment. And that is why these reasons that you classify and understand before you book these locations would be based on regional requirements, or requirements, your understanding of the requirements of culture in that location, and these would then be classed out as higher preference only, lower preference. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Don't know whether I've been able to explain that, but I've tried my level best, because this bit is to relate it to the preferences, but with preferences, you have to keep in mind that there would be some requirements that you would have from a cultural point of view. That if I book a holiday, one of the things that I want to do is, because I speak Spanish or German or French and English, I might want to go across to a location wherein the language would not be a barrier. So that if you put into cultural requirements, that is in high context. But if I put language is something which is not important, as long as they can speak a bit of English and I can understand and converse, and that might not be a requirement from a communication standpoint of view. Then in that case, if language turns out to be a barrier, but it's not important, or important for you to change your decision or make a decision, then you'll put that in low context. And that would be the cultural aspect of it that we need to understand from a theoretical point of view.
Okay.
These three theories would then, be looking at, we will be looking at, going into a bit more detail, and that would be covered in the aspect of assessment criteria 3.1, wherein you want to now look at using these theories with an example of, say, an organization, and say how this is related to the tourism, international tourism in particular. So what I've done is I've done a couple of slides for each of these assessment criteria, and I've explained some of these concepts from a point of view of different theories and how you can apply them, in the context of cultural requirements when you look at international tourism. Is that okay? I think I'm not going to go and discuss this in a bit more detail, because some of these overarching discussion that we've done to understand the learning outcome is going to be, the first part is going to look at again these theories in a bit more detail. The second part is the implication of it, and the third part is the implication of it from a point of view of you managing human resources requirement. So it's a case of going through some of these slides to understand each of the individual dimensions and how these dimensions play an important part in underpinning what was essentially proposed and now universally accepted in terms of the cultural dimension and theories as far as tourism and hospitality sector is concerned.
Okay.
Is that okay? Now, what I've also done is I will show you, there are three, case studies in general, which are basically what I would suggest would be a good read as far as, detailing of this is concerned. So let me just briefly show you, and I'll upload them on Moodle so that you're able to go through them offline. Let me just quickly show the PDF documents. So one of them is this particular document. Let me just quickly share the screen. So, in a bit more detail, if you want to read about these theories, the three cultural dimension theories, this is a handout that I have created, and that handout basically explains in a bit more detail these three theories, going into background, application, implications of this, and how this can be used in the context of tourism and hospitality management. That's the first handout to get a bit more detailing of the theories. The second one, which I would ask you to go through, is this particular one, which talks about how within the tourism and hospitality sector. One second. Why is this used in the context of tourism and hospitality sector, and how does the management in general use this to manage performance within the organization? So it's a cross-cultural management and organizational performance document, which essentially allows you to understand, because how this can be applied in the context of tourism is specifically discussed, in this particular article. So let me just share that with you now. That's this one that you see. And the third one that we want to look at is this one in the context of how, if you have better understanding of cultural differences and requirements, how does it help the company grow its business internationally within the context of tourism. This one. So this is a bit journal. This particular document is a bit journal simply because it is focused on understanding cross-cultural management and development of it in the context of businesses, and why this became important for organizations to understand. Because when globalization started to happen, when organizations started to have operations in many different countries, and they started to localize their offerings, why this became important as a concept. So this bit is a generic document. The other important specific document with regards to the tourism and hospitality management is this one. And I think along with this and the theoretical document, which is basically detailing the theories in detail, would allow you to cover this outcome, comprehensively. So I'll get these uploaded onto the Moodle just shortly after the session. And if you have any questions, feel free to email them over, or we can have a quick discussion when we do the next learning outcome, on Wednesday.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, perfect.
Good stuff. Thanks for attending today, and I will catch up with you on Wednesday.
Thank you.
Take care. Thanks.